Picture this. A person from 30,000 years ago is standing in front of you right now. No paint, no jewelry, none of the tricks ancient cultures used to fake wealth and status. Just the actual body, the actual face, exactly as evolution built it. Would you actually find them attractive? Not impressive, not interesting. Attractive, the way you'd actually notice a stranger across a room. The honest answer isn't yes or no. It splits their body apart from their face in a way you wouldn't expect, and figuring out why tells you something strange about what attraction actually is. Start with the body, because this is where ancient humans genuinely might win. Bone density tells you more about a person's lifetime activity than almost anything else, because bone rebuilds itself around stress, the same way muscle does. Researchers comparing the skeletons of Paleolithic humans to modern populations found something wild. The bone density and joint structure of an average hunter-gatherer from around 20,000 years ago was comparable to a modern trained athlete. Not an average adult, an athlete. Cross-country runners, professional soccer players, that tier. This wasn't a gym-built physique. It was the daily requirement of walking miles to track animals, carrying kills back to camp, digging, climbing, and doing it again the next day, for an entire life, with no rest days and no desk job in between. Height backs this up in a strange way, because it actually went backward for a while, and this is the part that surprises people every time. Skeletal remains show that late Paleolithic humans, right before farming took over, were taller on average than the generations that came after them. Once humans settled down and started living off a small handful of crops instead of a varied hunted diet, nutrition dropped and average height in several regions measurably shrank for thousands of years before it slowly climbed back. Read that again. Farming, the thing that's supposed to be progress, made humans shorter for a while. The lean, tall, physically capable hunter-gatherer body wasn't something agriculture improved on. It was closer to a baseline that agriculture temporarily broke. So if attraction ran purely on build, on muscle and posture and height, a person pulled straight out of 25,000 years ago might genuinely turn heads on a modern street. But bodies are only half the story, and the face is where things get complicated, because it depends entirely on exactly how far back you go. Here's where it gets specific, because ancient human isn't one face, it's a moving target, and how far back you go changes the answer completely. Go back 300,000 years, near the very start of our species, and you would not mistake that skull for a modern one. A heavy shelf of bone sits above the eyes, instead of a smooth brow. The jaw pushes forward instead of tucking neatly under the face. The whole skull runs long front to back instead of rounded. Neanderthals, who lived alongside early humans and interbred with them, pushed all of this further. No real chin at all, a face built wide and forward to warm freezing air before it hit the lungs. None of it made them lesser. Their brains, on average, were slightly larger than yours. But run that skull past a modern eye trained on modern proportions, and it reads as rugged at best, closer to a boxer who's taken one too many hits than anyone you'd swipe right on. Now move forward to around 30,000 to 40,000 years ago, the period of the people sometimes called Cro-Magnon, and something changes. Forensic facial reconstructions built from actual skulls, using the same techniques crime labs use to identify unidentified remains, show faces that look startlingly close to modern humans. Rounder skulls, smaller brow ridges, a defined chin. Reconstructions of well-preserved individuals from this era, when done properly and stripped of artistic guesswork, tend to produce a face that would not stand out on a modern street. Not because the reconstruction is being generous, but because by that point, the human face had already largely finished becoming what it is now. There's a real reason the face kept softening over that stretch of time, and once you hear it, you'll never look at a dog the same way again. Researchers comparing skull shapes across hundreds of thousands of years found that human faces gradually got less rugged, more rounded, structurally closer to a juvenile shape, even in full-grown adults. Scientists call this the self-domestication hypothesis, and the comparison they actually use is dogs. Look at a wolf next to a golden retriever. Same ancestry, wildly different face, because the wolf survives on aggression and the retriever was bred, generation after generation, for getting along. Heavy brow ridges and jutting jaws are, among other things, driven by testosterone. As human groups leaned harder into cooperation instead of raw dominance to survive, that same softening happened to us, on our own, without anyone breeding us for it. Your face looks the way it does partly because your ancestors' social lives quietly selected for a gentler skull, the same way ours did to the dog sleeping on your couch. If you're finding this as interesting as we do, go ahead and subscribe, because the next part is the actual answer to the question in the title, and it's not what most people expect. Because attractiveness was never really about brow ridges or chins specifically. Those are downstream of something deeper, and evolutionary psychologists have spent decades trying to nail down what that something actually is. The leading answer is symmetry. Across cultures with almost no contact with each other, studies on facial preference keep landing on the same result. People rate more symmetrical faces as more attractive, and this shows up even in infants only a few months old, long before any baby has absorbed a magazine cover or a beauty standard. Symmetry works as a signal because a body that develops without disease, malnutrition, or genetic disruption tends to grow more evenly on both sides. A symmetrical face is, roughly speaking, a walking record of a stable, healthy development. That's not a modern invention. That's biology reading biology, and it would have applied exactly the same way 30,000 years ago as it does now. The same logic shows up in body proportions. Research on waist-to-hip ratio, most famously by psychologist Devendra Singh, found the same preference showing up again and again in completely unconnected societies, roughly a narrower waist relative to the hips, regardless of overall body size or how much food a culture actually had. The theory is that this ratio correlates with fertility and hormonal health, which made it a useful shortcut for mate selection long before anyone understood reproductive biology. It's part of why the earlier point about ancient beauty ideals favoring a fuller body isn't actually a contradiction. Cultures argued endlessly over how much overall body fat was attractive, skinny versus soft, depending on food scarcity. But the ratio between waist and hip kept showing up as a preference, no matter which way that argument went. This is really the split the whole question comes down to. Some parts of attraction are hardware, wired in by evolution, because they reliably signaled health and fertility, and those parts would have worked on a person from the Paleolithic exactly the way they work today. Symmetry, proportion, skin free of visible disease, a body capable of movement and strength. None of that needed fashion to matter. It mattered before fashion existed. But the other layer, the one covered in the beauty standard side of this story, was software, culturally installed on top. Whether pale skin or tan skin read as beautiful, whether a full figure or a lean one was the ideal. Whether a joined unibrow or a shaved head or a blackened tooth counted as attractive. That layer changed constantly, sometimes flipping completely within a few centuries, because it was never about biology. It was about status, about what was rare and expensive to achieve in a given time and place. So, would you find a person from 30,000 years ago attractive? Strip away the wigs and the lead-based makeup and the elongated skulls, and what you'd likely be looking at is someone with an athlete's build, a face that had already mostly finished evolving into the one you see in the mirror, and the same symmetrical features your brain is hardwired to notice as healthy. They wouldn't have needed your gym, your dentist, or your skincare routine to earn that. Evolution had already been quietly optimizing for it for a very long time, long before either of you were born to appreciate it. What's actually strange is not that ancient human might have been attractive. It's that the standard barely moved at all. Cultures spent thousands of years arguing over paint, weight, and status, dressing the same underlying signal in 100 different costumes. Take the costume off, and the thing underneath, symmetry, health, proportion, was never ancient or modern. It was just human, the whole time.